I do have to ask you because obviously, as uh, someone who's had decades of experience studying how diseases spread in nature, there's been the huge debate over the origin of the COVID virus, whether it came from a lab or whether it came from nature.
Mm-hmm.
With all the knowledge you have from how diseases can incubate in nature and spread to humans, what is your professional opinion on where you think COVID came from?
When the COVID outbreak was going on back in 2020, we had no funding to do mosquito work, and we wanted to kind of contribute as a community of scientists in Panama to what was happening in Panama with COVID and SARS-CoV-2. So I did a little bit of reading about that, and we actually published a couple papers on like how the Panamanian Minister of Health should react and use that pandemic as an opportunity to build research and knowledge about it. And so I read quite a few papers on it. I don't really think that this pathogen could have been engineered in a lab. It would be extremely difficult to be able to have
Mm,
a pathogen that behaved the way this virus behaved. Because I mean, you could engineer animals and pathogens and use them as weapons, military weapons and biological weapons, but that kind of pathogen will be the kind of pathogen that will wipe out completely the humanity all at
yeah.
once. This pathogen, we saw how the pathogen evolved through the waves of invading new populations and new areas, and so the way the mutations accumulated in the genome of the virus,
Mm.
you can't control for that. Like if
Mm,
once a pathogen is released, you know, either kills everyone, in which case it would have been engineered in a lab,
Mm-hmm.
or evolved in the way that the SARS-CoV-2 did.
mhm.
Very similar to the first SARS-CoV-1 when it came out. So my guess is that these viruses are coming out of the interaction between humans and animals, either by, these wet markets in
Mm,
China that have a lot of wildlife animals all together,
yeah.
or in another way. But I don't think this pathogen could have
S-
been engineered.
So you
This is
said,
my humble opinion.
yeah, yeah.
I'm not a virologist, but the few literature that I went through, I think it would be really hard to accomplish this.
So you think if there was, well, I mean, if the lab in Wuhan that was doing this research on viruses, the fact that it was released and it still killed millions of people, but you think if they were crafting some sort of super virus to study, because that was the argument that the lab is doing gain of function research in Wuhan, so they're taking viruses from nature and they're running them through, ferrets and rats to accelerate the development of the virus much faster than it would develop in nature, so that they sort of were creating these super viruses to study, so that if a super virus ever broke out in nature, we would have some way to combat it. And then the super virus somehow got out of the lab or infected someone in the lab, they left and then started COVID. You think if something like that happened, the virus would be way more deadly than it actually was?
Oh yeah, yeah. The scenario that you're describing looks sounds really difficult under the regulations that we have to conduct this type of research. You have bioethic committees. Like, scientists cannot just do whatever they want. There's regulations. All studies have to be approved, and it makes it really difficult to believe that they were doing this in China. I mean, I don't know really, like, but that goal is not necessarily a scientific goal. It looks more like they were, trying to develop a biological weapon. And if that was the aim of it, then it's a completely different thing out of the scientific realm.
Yeah.
Like, I don't think scientists, uh, as will be pursuing that kind of
Yeah.
aim necessarily. Unless they're doing something else. But
We're already busy trying to figure out those that already exist rather
Yeah.
than try to figure out potential future ones.
Yeah.
Although I would make the argument, I totally agree with you that like if this is all done the proper way, like scientists first of all do not necessarily aspire to do this type of research, and then like you said, like you can't just do whatever you want in your lab. I don't know exactly the kind of institute if it was like linked with the military or something. And my argument to what you're saying is like probably if they were building a virus that would kill everyone, that's what would have done. But if they were in the process of doing it and it did like accidentally escape before they kind of reached that
Yeah.
point,
Keep
and
it closer to your, there you go.
they're using different animals to get to that point, you could possibly. But
This
yeah.
is just my complete layman's understanding of the argument for the fact that it was a lab created virus is that there was gain of function research going on in the lab in Wuhan, which apparently was at a level that wasn't secure enough to be doing this type of research. It was a level 2, and apparently, like gain of function is only supposed to be done in a level 4 or whatever. Like a lab that has higher security preparations, and these scientists weren't doing any research in bad faith. They were trying to create super viruses so that they could understand them if something like that ever broke out in nature. And so the argument against gain of function research is why create a super virus and even take the chance that it can get released to humanity and just instead just not create these super viruses and we'll figure it out. God forbid something does break out like that
I
in
mean,
nature. I'm not saying that's what happened. I don't have the expertise to say whether or not that was happening, but I do know gain of function research goes on for a fact. But because China has been so secretive with what has gone on in the labs, we really don't have a clear picture of what they were studying.
I think it sounds super fishy. I mean, I don't have also all the elements right in front of me, but like, I think if you're a virologist, any kind of scientist you are, where you are working with dangerous chemicals, viruses, etc., like, you know where to do it. Like, I did not work there, but to me, it sounds crazy that you would be a virologist and you'd be like, oh, I'm going to manipulate viruses in a BCL2. That just doesn't make any sense, where you would do like very simple things. So that's the first thing that I'm like, doesn't really make any sense. And the second thing with the gain of function mutation, I mean, there's loads of reasons to gain of functions. The ones that I'm more familiar with, which is not with viruses, is when you try to study gain of function mutations in maybe genes or something that already exist in real life so that we can treat maybe those gain of function mutations. So that also sounds kind of weird to me, that they'll be like, let's see what could happen in nature, which when you think about it is a billion different possibilities. So there's no even way for you to try to make a super virus because it could happen.
Right. But I mean, what Zach is describing so far is two things, right? Whether they were actually purposely
Mm-hmm.
engineering this virus to release it as a biological weapon,
Mm-hmm.
I don't
or
believe that.
or
I
if
don't
it
think
was
that
an accident
Yeah.
Yeah.
that they were doing research and then the virus, whatever they were working with,
Yeah.
escaped, and that's another possibility,
Mhm.
I
right?
think if something did happen, and not that I have the expertise to say one way or the other, but if it did come from a lab, I think it's scientists in good faith trying to do good work
Mhm.
where something happened, where someone got infected, the virus got out somehow. I don't believe it was a biological weapon of
Okay.
any kind.
All right.
Yeah,
Yeah, accidents happens in a lab all the time,
yeah,
and you can't control the final outcome of it.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Which is why it makes more sense to go to a level 4 when you know you're manipulating things that could
Sure.
go wrong. So to me, like, if anything, this is the weirdest part, that you'd be like, we're aware that we're manipulating a virus, but we're doing it in the
Yeah.
one of the lowest levels that it
Yeah.
could be.